So again, my file for the test cases, it includes the code coverage, right? Because in order to have data coverage, I need all of them, right? Because I'm just adding additional test cases. I'm not writing, I opened the wrong one. I'm not writing all new test cases because I don't want duplicates, right? So I only want to write the additional test cases. So let me go down to where the additional test cases are. Where are they? Here we are, okay? And they're exactly what I just discussed. So for the first one, we are saying that we want to test for invalid parameter, but this time we want to do it for 0 value, right? So before we did it for negative, now we're doing it for 0. And the test case is actually identical, except for the value I'm passing, right? So I'm passing is 0. And then remember, I want to do the other boundary, which is 5, right? So again, same test case, passing a 5. That's why writing unit test cases is so quick, right? Because they're short, they to the point. A lot of times they just checking different values being passed to the methods or constructors, and all you have to do is change the parameter, change the name of the method, right, to make it meaningful, and your messages, right? Over here I was talking about zeros, over here I'm talking about 5. Sometimes it's even the same, right? Because all it is that it should be this versus that, right? And in this case, the message, the assertion message, right, that's not going to change. That was given to us by requirements, right? So very quick to add these additional test cases, right? And then again, something much bigger, right? 10, which is my next one, right? So all of these are for the first parameter, right? And I'm just giving it different values to make sure it's still working correctly for these different values, right? Let's run them, by the way. Okay, so let's run the first one. So remember we tested that it works for negative, right? And it worked. Well, it worked. It threw an exception, but it was wrong exception, right? So let's see what happens with a 0. Of course, you know, if you look at the code, you know what should happen because the code is straightforward. It fails. So what's the error? Well, the error is that it didn't throw an exception at all, right? And if we look at the code, in fact, what the code says, it's checking that the number is less than 0, but it's not checking that it's less than or equals, right? It's missing this equals. So hey, we found another defect, right? But notice we found this defect with a data coverage, right? We found this defect data coverage because for the statement coverage, all we had to do is have a single test case that executes this line of code, right? And we didn't care which of these conditions it was checking for. So it's only when we added additional criteria that we found it. Now, if we were doing branch coverage in addition, right, in addition to a statement coverage, we also would have found it because this happens to be a branch, right? But the point is that single coverage is not going to find all your defects. Well, no coverage will find all your defects, but the more coverages you use in your testing, the more test cases you have and more defects you're likely to find. All right, so let's continue. So what's the next kind of test case we have? So the next test case we have is, remember we already had a test case code coverage for the string parameter that it was null. So now we're doing it for an empty string, right? So again, same code, right? Copy paste, change the name of my method, but now pass, instead of null, pass it the empty string, right? And change the messages generated in my test case to be correct, right? And then, right, we have a final method, right? So again, remember we have tested that when it goes in the loop that it's doing the correct thing. Well, now we want to test that it still works correctly when there is no loop, or in other words, when the value is already less than or equals 0. And the way we can do that, right, is we can use the default constructor, because remember, default constructor sets the attribute to -1, right? So if we call default constructor and we don't change the attribute integer in any way, it's going to be -1. And in that case, what we want to happen is we want to get the empty string, right? So we create an instance using default constructor, we call the method, and we expect that it's supposed to give us empty string. And if you run it, that's exactly what it does. And then I have these two test cases that I told you where when I originally wrote my test cases, I didn't even have. And in fact, if you watched the first video, very first video where, was the first video, or the second video, but anyway, the video where I went over the tutorial.java, and I kind of hesitated in the video, you might remember, and I got stuck for a few seconds on these lines of code right here when I was explaining what they're doing. That's literally when I realized that I had a defect. That's literally when I realized, and I was like, huh. And I thought about it. I finished the video, I didn't change it, and I thought about it because I said, this is a good learning, right? This is a good learning point, how you create unit test cases, that sometimes you create them up front, and sometimes you realize you have a defect and then you create them, right? So I created 2 new test cases, and what I'm checking is that after I create the object with specific values and I call the concat loop, that the values are still the same. So when I pass 2, I expect it to be still 2, and when I pass num, I expect it to be still num, right? So that's it for data coverage. Have fun with your exercise. I'm sure you're gonna do great.